Okay, I'm doing a double bill today as the final videos of the week. This is going to be Waterloo and Citizen K, which is two films that I don't think there's enough in them to go on to like a 15-minute video, but I think there's interesting stuff in both of them, so I'm just doing a double bill, even though they're not very linked at all. So Waterloo is the Rod Steiger, Christopher Plummer starring film from the late 60s. This is the film that killed the Kubrick Napoleon film, because this one bombed like so horribly. So it just killed the chance of Kubrick doing Napoleon after 2001. So even though he'd written the script and he had everything ready, this film just killed it because it bombed so badly. And it's a pretty good film. I mean, it's not a great film, but it's a good film. The director of it had made War and Peace in Russia, and this was shot in Eastern Europe, so they had all these armies done up as French and British soldiers, so they could do all these big fight scenes and army of thousands, as you can see behind me. So it was a film of scale, and it was trying to show an atmosphere of what's going on, but because it had to try and sell the film, they had to have major stars in it, like Christopher Plummer, who was just coming off Sound of Music, and Rod Steiger, who'd been a big star for a while. But it didn't really deliver for the mass audience, because both the characters are kind of cold, and you don't really get to know them that well. You get to know Napoleon a little bit at the beginning as you see him, and then you get to see Wellington in response to Napoleon. The Wellington stuff works better though. I think Christopher Plummer's much better casting as Wellington than Steiger as Napoleon. Steiger's decent as Napoleon. He's pretty good, but you get a sense they could have someone else. And you found out that Kubrick wanted to cast Jack Nicholson as Napoleon, and that'd have been much better casting than Rod Steiger, because Nicholson has that kind of, devil in him that would have made sense for someone who was trying to conquer Europe. And that crazy side, you don't get the crazy as much of Steiger as you really need. You get a guy who's planned stuff out, but you don't get the crazy. You don't get the delusional thing of, this is a guy who wanted to conquer Europe and make France great. You don't get that. You don't get the guy who would fight back again and again and again. He just looks defeated and he looks determined, but you don't get the crazy. And that's the thing that's missing from this film, is the crazy of Napoleon, ultimately. But you get the stoicism of Wellington. You get a sense of Wellington as a guy in a society who understands that he has to sacrifice hundreds of men. And as the film goes on, he starts to lose people he knows and is close to in this fight, and you see the cost of it. But he really expects that. He knows that's going to happen. And it's a much sadder performance. But this should never have happened in the first place, but Napoleon was such a lunatic, it had to happen. So it's a much more interesting performance. It's like, you kind of wish it was just about him, because Wellington was the interesting character in this film, but you had to spend time with Napoleon, and it's like, I feel this is a film that should have been longer, but it's cut down. And the Wellington stuff feels more cut down than Napoleon stuff, but the Wellington stuff's more interesting. So there is that element to the film. But that's the downside. The upside is the grit and the atmosphere of the locations, and because it shows it Eastern Europe to shoot it all in, and it just looks like a completely awful place to be in this field, and all these different little barns nearby, and these houses. They spend hours trying to defend a house that no one gives a crap about. And there's this sense of atmosphere, but try to make these little gains and losses, and how everything depends on different forces arriving in time, and it's just luck. A lot of time you've got all these plans, you're just hoping for luck. And in this film, Napoleon's luck has run out, and Wellington still has a little bit of it, but it's just threadbare at the most. And that atmosphere of how difficult it is to run a campaign, how difficult it is to deal with all your men, all these people who, a lot of them don't want to be there. It's a career for them, but they don't want to be there, and you have to deal with people who are grifters and all the rest of it, and you can't quite trust. There's that sense of it throughout the film, and even your own people in Napoleon's case could be plotting against you. even though they say they're behind you and they want what you want, it's like, how far behind me are they really? But again, Napoleon was a nut, and that's the thing, because Napoleon's not as nutty as he should be. He should be, I mean, he's like a tactician, yeah, but Napoleon had some crazy, and you don't get the crazy here, and you don't. That adds to the sense of some monotony to it as the fights go on, because you don't have the kind of threat of a crazy Napoleon here that you really needed to give it an extra edge. But because I mean, the final fight takes forever. The final fight's huge. I mean, it's basically a build up to a fight and a fight. Really, that's ultimately the film. You get 20 minutes of the politics of Napoleon before that, but then basically it's a big fight. And the fight's terrific. But you don't have that many characters, so you can get distance from it, because ultimately you're not really... You've got one cool guy versus a crazy guy. And the cool guy's interesting, but the crazy guy should be crazier. See, to the dynamic, the dramatic dynamic's just not quite in sync. And that kind of really hurts the film. But the atmosphere's great. I mean, I'd happily rewatch this film for the atmosphere. The atmosphere's terrific. It's just not as good as the Abel Gance Napoleon, because the Abel Gance Napoleon had a lot more excitement in the fights, and also the crazy Napoleon, and a suggestion of how crazy the whole thing was. This one, it's sort of... I mean, the Gance one actually had the French Revolution, how all the variations of that as well. This one just has Napoleon taking over and trying to expand and then getting fought back. It's 2.5 hours of a very basic story, and there's not that much elaboration on the characters. But it's still interesting. It's still worth seeing. So I'd recommend that try and see it as big a screen as possible. That's on a projector, and it actually helps the scale of the film. You can get it in Blu-ray just now. You can also get it on streaming, which is where I got it, because I wasn't paying 20 quid for a Blu-ray of this film. But it is worth it. Okay, this one is a documentary. Citizen Kane, a documentary of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. It's directed by Alex Gibney, but it's about Khodorkovsky, who was one of the big oligarchs in Russia in the 1990s, who came up after the fall of the Soviet Union, who came up and he was a banker and started buying up everything and became an oil billionaire. And eventually he developed some social conscience and actually started to oppose Putin when Putin got in power. So these oligarchs actually were the people who kept Yeltsin in power, even though Yeltsin was ill and there was a lot of problems going on. But they did not want the Communist Party to come back in, so they kept Yeltsin in through lots of different schemes. And when Putin became Yeltsin's follow-up leader, they thought he would do the same. And it turns out Putin had different ideas, and Putin was all for Putin, really. So, and he thought that the Russian state was Putin's state. And all the oligarchs slowly started to find themselves arrested or having to go on the run. But Khodorkovsky was the one that really got under Putin's skin, because he was the one that was a real threat to him, because Khodorkovsky basically re-energized the oil fields. Khodorkovsky went from being a banker to being an oil man. He dealt with all the oils and made companies that made a fortune, and that helped support post-Soviet Union Russia for a long time, and was a big reason for its stability. Even though it hasn't done great, the oil field really was the thing, and because he was the one, Khodorkovsky was the one who actually built it all up, got everything working. He was a national hero, even though people thought he was a bit dodgy in some cases, because he's a billionaire. What do you expect? So him and he started to question the corruption of Putin publicly, and as he more or less says, he probably went too far. He went so far, so often, that when he stepped over the line with Putin, he didn't realise how far he'd stepped over the line, and suddenly he was getting investigated for tax fraud and all the rest of it, and his company was taken away from him, and he was sent to Siberia in jail for 10 years, and it was like a case of Putin basically calling him a criminal and was going to keep him in jail for as long as possible. And eventually got out when his mother was dying, And basically, it was 10 years later, and there's no way he could have enough power against Putin, so they let him out and basically saying that you have to leave the country. We'll let you out if you leave the country and don't ever come back, which he did. And then they pinned a murder suggestion on him, so he's now wanted for murder for this mayor who died. And no one's quite sure who was involved in the killing. They're saying that he may have paid someone to do it. He says he didn't do it. But it's hard to tell with all this stuff, because Putin's Russia is just a front of corruption. And even the Yeltsin Russia is a front of corruption. Like Russia for the last century has been a front of corruption. So this film is all about that. It's all about his rise, his fall, and what he did when he left the country, which was to fight against Putin outside the country and create a business that actually is free Russia, really, and which has been banned in Russia. But because he's a billionaire, even though Putin got most of the money, he knew where to hide money. So even when he came out of prison and went to the West with his wife and his family, he had like hundreds of millions stored away somewhere. So he's doing fine. Like, let him buy the drink if you ever meet him. That kind of thing. Now, the good thing about this documentary is, because Alec Gibney directed it and he's a good documentarian, it's not going for a sentimental thing of you must love this guy. You don't. Like, he was obviously in dodgy stuff. Even people who know him and liked him said, yeah, he's a lot better now after he's been humbled a little bit. But, you know, the suggestion is he could be a pain in the ass when he was younger. You know, and probably vain and self-important. Like, you know, no one's quite sure what happened to the mayor. There's lots of stuff there that, yeah, he could have been behind dodgy stuff. He probably was behind some dodgy stuff when it comes to the oil field. Because that's a field that has a lot of dodgy stuff going on. But if he just kept him with Putin, he'd probably been fine. But he couldn't resist it. And it's all about Putin's Russia, really. It's all about how the corruption of Russia, how they try to keep Russia out of the hands of the communists. And by doing so, they got a guy, Putin, who was a ex-KGB guy, but they thought they could control him, and turned out they could not. Like, Putin could not take, you know, any sense of people mocking him. And Putin would go down and anyone of the guys who run the TV channels had to leave Russia quickly, the oligarchs who run those. Anybody who's an oligarch who wanted to keep their money had to like shut up and say we're not interested in politics. And Khodorkovsky could not do that. He couldn't shut up. But it's all about Putin and how Russia's been corrupted and everything that had been basically taken away and used privatised in the 90s was brought back into the state in the 2000s. And Putin was just saying, yeah, these crooks stole this from the people and these people have taken it back, which means he was taking it back because the reason why our the lead guy in this documentary was hated so much by Putin because he brought up Putin's side deals that he was making a fortune from, which Putin did not want anyone to hear about. So there's lots of stuff like that, and it's all about how it's interesting. It's all about corruption, even within a state, which states all we're off the people. It's easy to be corrupt in it. Like, I'm sure in China there's tons of corruption. There's tons of side deals. In Russia there's tons of side deals. There's lots of side deals for everybody who plays the party line. And it's just shows how an authoritarian government can come in, power, and just how it develops. And it's a really fascinating look at post-Soviet Union Russia and how a society can go from being under the control of communism, how it can quickly collapse, how it can be brought back up, and how it can be corrupted quite easily by the wrong person in power. So it's a really fascinating situation. It's one of those documentaries you wish there was more, it was longer. I mean, it was about 2 hours long, but you wish it could have been more epic because some of the early day stuff was really fascinating. You wish you'd seen more of it. But they were cutting for a good pace to make sure the story's good. And because there's a central person to follow, but there's a lot of stuff around them that you wish you'd seen more of because there's lots of fascinating things going on there. But it is a film I'd recommend watching because it does give you a very good idea about what's going on in Russia now, why it's happening, what led to it. So it's very interesting documentary. So I hope you enjoyed this video about Waterloo and, you know, Citizen K. The idea of Napoleon and Putin being small men with massive egos may or may not like these videos. Well, I'll be back next week. Hopefully I won't get poisoned by nuclear power for that one joke. Bye for now.